There we go. And ask Glen to pop his camera back on and get started. So Glen is coming to us from, well, not from University College Cork because we're all working from home, but in theory from there. And as I said, is going to talk to us about the coastal community adaptation to climate change, drawing insight from one of the projects he's been involved in. So Glen, I think we've got quite a few people on now, so rather than wait any longer, I will ask you to get started.
Okay, it sounds like people can hear me, I guess.
I can hear you fine, so hopefully that means everybody else can, yeah.
Okay, I'll just
I'll switch my video off.
Pop this up as well. Okay, and I'll make a start. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Emma, for that introduction as well. As Emma mentioned, I'm going to present a project that I'm working on called BECOMAR. BECOMAR is Building Coastal and Marine Resilience. Before I begin, I just want to quickly say that this is sort of one view of how to tackle this kind of topic, and so this webinar really is a chance, if people are involved in similar things or have any input, taking questions, but also very much taking comments as well. So BECOMAR runs from March 2019 until March of next year. It's funded by the Environmental Protection Agency in Ireland and the Marine Institute as well, and it's hosted at University College Cork and NUI Galway. The project coordinator is Martin Letitia here in UCC, or as Emma said, at least here in this city. Anne-Marie O'Hagan and Timothy O'Higgins from UCC are also involved in the project, and our partner in NUIG is Eugene Farrell. As the title suggests, this presentation and the project itself is more about climate change adaptation than mitigation. So to give a brief overview there of what I'm going to cover in this short presentation, I'm going to spend about an hour or so defining resilience. No, not really. Then I'm going to quickly present the BECOMAR project aims and methods, present two case studies. Don't worry if you read Youghal there for the first one, so did I the first time, but the case of Youghal and then the case of the Maharees, and then say a little bit about resilience reimagined. Oops, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself there a little bit. So the first of a long series of slides covered in words. Resilience has its kind of origins in ecology. Carpenter et al. Point to three main elements here: the amount of change that the system can undergo, its ability to self-organize, and its capacity to learn and adapt. And I'll give the game away at this early stage and say that we kind of find in the project that resilience also has a lot to do with governance and good governance in particular. In terms of the BECOMAR aims, we primarily want to present two roadmaps. One roadmap for local authorities, that's a form of municipal government in Ireland, and one roadmap for local communities. And these roadmaps, before we even begin, are populated with a series of climate change related policies, national policies, climate action plan, national adaptation framework, and a national mitigation plan. This list is not exhaustive, but there's also regional and sectoral plans, adaptations and strategies, and a form of coordinated community engagement through the National Dialogue on Climate Action. There's quite a lot of information on the next slide, but the details are not so important. What we started to do is analyze some of the frameworks that exist in national policy. This is a governance structure for national adaptation in Ireland, for example. And what we found time again was that there was a key element missing from these, which was local people. It's local people at all levels, really. And I think the kind of assumption there is that they're covered by local authorities. But what we wanted to do with the BCOMAR project was to lead with local people. And so this explains the case study approach that we took, and also and other methods that we use are interviews. And we were in the midst of planning a series of workshops in spring this year. Needn't explain why that was kind of reeled in, but we're doing some survey work now to kind of make up the lost ground where we can. And the project is also informed by detailed policy analysis. So the two case studies then are very different. The first one, it's okay, you can keep saying Youghal if you want to. The town of Youghal there is shown on the map, situated between Cork City and Waterford. And it has a population, an urban population of about 9,000 people. It's situated on what is branded as Ireland's ancient east, which is kind of a tourist trail that runs along the coastline in this part of Ireland. Legend has Walter Raleigh planted the first potato in Ireland in the town of Youghal. I'll just throw up a couple of images of the town there. It leads very much with its heritage in attracting tourists. You've got the St Mary's Church there, picture from the outside and the inside. Those wooden beams inside are absolutely incredible. And there's the Clockgate Tower as well over the main street, the high street through Youghal, which is a former prison. So the church dates back to the 12th century, and the Clockgate Tower right back to the 14th century. And on the right-hand side there, you can also see I'm just going to see if I can minimize video of myself. Yep, okay. On the right-hand side there, you can see what's called the Eco Boardwalk, which is a wooden boardwalk that runs along Front Strand, or the main beach in Ireland. And it's an extremely popular facility. At present, it's only 400 meters long, but as we speak, it's being extended out to 2.5 kilometers. And the main big story of the last couple of years is that, I now can't, there you go, is that Ireland is, Youghal is the location of Ireland's first Ironman triathlon. And this is huge for local businesses. The population of the town swelled considerably during that long weekend and the week leading up to it. So what we wanted to do in this project was really to understand Youghal first. So we're kind of talking here about resilience without climate change. Just to give a very brief bit of background, Youghal had a pretty active industry, primarily a carpet manufacturing industry that expanded rapidly in the 50s, but by the end of the 90s had all but collapsed. And anecdotally, a lot of evidence we're coming across, and a lot of people will tell you this about the town, is that the Celtic Tiger economy from 95 to 2008 largely bypassed the town. So this leads to some kind of unfortunate statistics, census statistics, but 3 key ones highlighted there: high unemployment rate, although you can see there that it is actually has been decreasing, but a poor deprivation index as well, with 40% of the urban population of Youghal classed as disadvantaged or very disadvantaged. So this is the first story that kind of emerged through this case study. But there is also a climate change element, as you can imagine, with a coastal town, especially given that a lot of the center of town is a relatively old picture, but the red highlighted bit there, a lot of that's built on, and in the context of climate change, sea level rise, and increased frequency and intensity of storms, that is an issue. And some of the data, these are forecasted coastal flood extents for a mid-range future scenario. So we're talking here about a 20% increase in rainfall and a 500 millimeter sea level rise. And you can see there the darker green areas are the sort of 10%, 1 in 10 year flood extents, and a lighter green, a bigger area and less frequent, but still it is certainly becoming a topic locally in Youghal. And this kind of, we found divided levels of interest in this. The side to the left of that red area, Youghal actually climbs steeply on hills, and you can see there that property owners would perhaps engage with the idea of coastal flooding in different ways depending on where they live, which is why we started to engage more in services and access to services. The fire station, for example, in the town is the location where often the deepest flood water is measured. We're currently running a survey as well. We've identified through meetings and interviews and a series of flood reports some key amenities, facilities and sites that perhaps need to be raised in discussion in the context of climate change. Overall, the response to this so far on the left-hand side, sites 1 and 2, which is the Front Strand and the Eco Boardwalk, have raised the most concern. But in response to a couple of the questions here, do you think that the climate in Youghal is changing? Overwhelmingly, yes, just there's a varying degree of certainty there. And how concerned are you about the impact of climate change? Again, pretty concerned, with levels of concern being the main difference. And we also started to engage in this survey. We plan to do this more in follow-up work. Started to engage on management approaches to climate adaptation. There's an overwhelming majority of local people there who suggest that action needs to be taken. The difference between red and blue is whether it should take precedence over current needs or not. So going on briefly to the second case study, a very, very different case study. This is on the west coast of Ireland. It's the Maharees in County Kerry. And it's basically a sandy tombolo that sticks out off the Dingle Peninsula there. There's a photo, an aerial photograph that I did not take, but from about that sort of angle, you can see kind of what we're looking at here. I'm pretty sure I had the reference on for that photo. Doesn't seem to have come up there, but and the tombolo has a permanent population of only 300 people. So it's a very different kind of case study to Youghal. There's another photograph which I did take from that beach roughly in that angle. I think the first and foremost the thing to say about this area is that it's extremely beautiful. But based on ongoing research and research that's overlapped into BECO-MAR, into this project, there are issues of conservation and also preserving the tombolo itself. So the knapsack toad is a local kind of icon of tombolo, and you can see there as well that the area is surrounded by OSPAR NPA and Ramsar sites. Tourism is very important to the area. Water sports, surfing, scuba diving. And you can see there on that map, there's kind of an overview of what is branded as the Wild Atlantic Way in Ireland, and Maharees is on this kind of tourist route as well. But there is sort of there's definitely a strong climate change threat, and this is almost existential in nature. You can see there's a photo there taken from on top of the tombolo. It's a sand dune ecosystem, and there are conservation and preservation activities of local groups such as the Maharees Conservation Association trying to plant extra marram grass on the sand dunes to improve the structural integrity of the area. And this photograph shows nicely some of the progress that's been made there around the knocks water sports facility between March 2016 on the left-hand side and September 2017. Eugene Farrell on the project is actually a coastal geomorphologist who we could spend another 15 minutes talking about this image, I guess. But the shingle build-up on the right-hand side there on that picture is also a natural process and improves the structural integrity of the area. And the one road you can see there on those two images is the main access road that runs up through the Maharees, and that is obviously an issue after severe storm events. If that road is affected, then that's access to homes and businesses as well. So in the BECOMAR project, just to basically kind of reflect on those case studies, we're finding that it's possible to list elements of resilience, in particular elements of community resilience. So I've thrown a few in here as external investment, sports facilities, community resource centre, strong development plan and vision, outdoor activities, cultural events. These are some of the things that have been thrown up to us, boosting in some way community resilience. Add to that the potential of improved local employment opportunities, maybe transport infrastructure as well. And what we find is, as we're listing these elements of resilience, we're actually describing the town of Youghal, which would suggest that it is a resilient place. But what we're doing, and this is very much under construction and open to discussion, is kind of building a process, or putting together a process of building resilience, which we feel really begins with understanding the community, and understanding the community almost independent of climate change. Where is the community at? Where is the community at socio-economically? But also make space and note any socio-ecological or climate change themes there. And importantly, where is the community going? What plans and ambitions do they have? What are the ongoing processes? And we've, from the beginning of this project, been supportive of ongoing processes, but also sought to introduce alternative views and things that might want to be taken into account there. And that is really a process of linking ongoing actions and linking these kind of aspirations, I guess, to climate change policy at all levels. Not only linking it to climate change policy, but noting where policy supports, perhaps even hinders, or that there is silence in the policy around a particular issue. We've conducted an in-depth policy analysis of 7 local issues in the town of Youghal, for example, that have been raised to us, those being the deprivation, the will to grow the tourism industry, the issue with traffic volumes in the town, the durability of small businesses and of vacant buildings that exist in the centre of town, sea sediment changes in the area, and this low-lying land issue. Next steps from there then are linking the available scientific data as and where relevant. We're going to be connecting that to the Climate Ireland database as we go along. The key, I guess, of gaining traction, but we're finding it very useful here to work with existing local, sometimes informal governance networks. And we define governance networks there quite broadly, based on the idea that communities continue to govern themselves all the time. So can we sort of raise the discussion of adaptation and climate change within those? So very briefly then, just to kind of end, I guess, this, oops, sorry. And through building a process like that, it's kind of welcome to any town, where the idea is that we can apply this process to a range of coastal towns across Ireland. And Youghal and the Maharees I've kind of put on there, kind of indicative of roughly where they fit in. Youghal very much came from the beginning and understanding the community and approaching this topic for the first time. And for the Maharees, based on ongoing research already, and the fact that it is such an exposed strip of low-lying land, perhaps comes in at a bit of a later stage there in that process. So onto the final slide of reimagining resilience. Resilience is not a state, it's not a destination. You arrive there and you can brand a community resilient, but it's very much a process. So resilience is a process. It's a process of self-organization as well as organizing. It's a process of self-organization. So resilience is of governance as well, and of good governance and communication. A quick concept I'm going to introduce here. Never introduce a concept on the last slide. I don't know if that's a rule, perhaps it should be. But our project, we're fitting it into, this is borrowed from the IPCC, an IPCC report, the idea of sustainable pathways moving from our world and what we know about it through opportunity spaces. And these opportunity spaces have decision points towards possible futures of high resilience and low risk, or low resilience and high risk. And really this project is focused in this opportunity space and these decision points. And through this process that we're building up, we really want to find out what mechanisms exist locally to enable this decision making, and how is that supported by regional and national policy, and also what human resources exist. Some of this work is quite intensive to carry out, and a theme that stakeholders have been bringing up with us is that the human resources, the financial resources simply don't exist to work on this and give it the attention it perhaps deserves. So some references there. Thank you very much for listening. I do also, another big important rule of presenting is know your audience. I realize this has not been massively marine themed. There is a marine theme there, and I can go into more detail on that in the discussion perhaps, but for now, I think you probably heard enough of my voice, and go back to Emma.
I'm coming back in. That's great. Thank you very much, Glenn. That was really interesting. Thank you. It was great to hear a bit more about how the project has evolved since we were at in Cork in March, which feels like a lifetime ago.
Lots happened.
Lots happened since then. That's great. So we have got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, which is great. So they're in the chat box. That's fine. If you guys want to keep popping in the chat box, that's okay. I will keep an eye on them. The first question that came in while you were speaking was from Jean-Francois, who said, how long would you say stage 1 to 2 on your kind of resilience pathways model might typically take, and what was the level of support that would be required to actively engage with them? And I guess the them, I don't know, and Jean-Francois, I could be putting words in your mouth, but it's possibly to engage with those processes, but also to engage with the communities to help them engage with those processes. So it's probably a two-part.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jean-Francois. So first of all, it's very much under construction, but I would say that the first two processes are actually quite smooth, and the reason for that is what we did in the BecoMar project was to just kind of build up some contacts with local stakeholders and listen. At the beginning, it was very much about listening, and our experience, I know this from personal experience, some research experience as well, if you ask people to start telling their story, then you generally find a lot of people who are keen to do that. Our thinking behind that was that if we come in guns blazing with climate change, the climate change topic, it would perhaps be more difficult to build up that rapport, but we initially just said, tell us your story, tell us what's going on. Oh, you've got the Ironman, great, you know, etc. What are some of the challenges locally? So I would say 1 and 2 would probably be relatively easy, and that also is reflecting the level of support for engaging in those processes. Then you start talking about climate change, and everything seems to slow down a little bit. But I hope that answers your question.
That's great, thank you. We have a next question from Megan Alexander, who is asking about the opportunity space that you mentioned in your last slide, and how opportunity space at local scale might be constrained by governance at a national scale, so how those intersect with each other.
Yeah, great question, and kind of, thanks Megan, it gets to the root of the issue there. I think opportunity space is a very optimistic label. I like it. I think it's great, but it's, I think, certainly in Ireland, so Irish national climate change policy really picked up in 2015 with an act that I can't remember, the low carbon, an act that I can't remember the name of fully, but since then it's really kind of snowballed. And I think there is a bit of an assumption that national policy and also then regional policy and regional strategies kind of pick up the slack on climate change, you know. So, okay, we've got a policy, so we don't really have to do too much more there. But it can also be constraining because some of that policy you've got to, some of that policy is coming out on climate change issues, but some of the policy is coming out on growing tourism as well and improving road networks, etc. So, and they, in our reading so far, have been slow to pick up on climate change pressures, and so you occasionally come to competing interests there. You know, increasing tourist footfall massively, for example, if that's an objective, that will have issues for just purely the amount of people walking over sand dunes, the amount of people traveling. Some of those issues are mitigation based, some of those are adaptation based. So definitely there's a constraint there, and what we're trying to do is kind of highlight those constraints and perhaps explain how they might be addressed. So, but yeah, it's not easy.
And Glenn, just following up on that question from me, from the work that we're doing through CCAT, I will come on to the other questions in a second, but yeah. Have you found there to be any challenges with the fact that there isn't a clear kind of coastal management policy related to climate change in Ireland? So but where we have in the UK, we have the shoreline management plans, there are policies in place around managed realignment, etc. And I know from working in Ireland now that that's not the case right now. Is that proving complicated, or is that raising any other issues that through the work that you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose this is where we can get a bit more marine. But for those of you who don't know, Ireland is currently racing to put together a marine spatial plan based on EU deadlines. I think it's March of next year. And there's currently under consultation, or consultation has ended, it's being redrafted, the National Marine Planning Framework. And the first reading of that, unfortunately, there's not a great effort for marine planning in Ireland at this stage to kind of claim some responsibility or jurisdiction in the coastal area, and that effort isn't really being made from the terrestrial side either. So the coastal zone itself, that kind of thin strip is a bit neglected in Ireland from a regulation point of view and from a policy point of view. So it's definitely an issue that we're delving into as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, come back to the questions that have come in. There's a question from Mika Schroeder, who said, how are you defining community, and what strategies are you taking to seek diverse and inclusive participation in the project? Do they recognise that this is a potentially tricky question and that we could talk about it for hours? Yeah. But it's still one that's an important thing to consider. Absolutely.
The whole webinar could be based on that question, followed by a session in the pub afterwards if they were open or whatever. But So the Maharees case study, the community for this BCOMAR project has sort of started to define itself prior to the BCOMAR project, because we've picked up on work, or we are picking up on work that Eugene Farrell has been doing out there. And so in a sense, that community has sort of defined itself over the years of interest in saving the knapsack toad or saving the tombolo itself. The Youghal community, we chose Youghal for a couple of reasons. Other ideas came up at the beginning. We were going to look at an area of Dublin. There's another town south of here called Kinsale that we were looking at, but we found that both of those were quite well studied and receive a lot of research attention. Youghal itself, on that map I showed, you see Youghal's right in the middle between Waterford and Cork. It looks sort of central, but it actually, if you saw a map of County Cork, it's right on the fringes, right on the eastern fringes, and it's the last town before the border to Waterford. And there's a feeling there amongst a lot of people living in Youghal that they're sort of a bit neglected by county development plans, county strategies and initiatives. And so I think partly the community who has responded to us in this research maybe springs from that a little bit as well. We opened the gates opened the doors very widely at the beginning, but we did use some useful contacts in the town who have ongoing processes and initiatives. And so I suppose, again, we're running into the difficulties of defining community there, but trying to use as much existing organisations that have been active in Youghal. And it is when you get down to it, like any community, it's quite a divided community as well. So different factions will redefine themselves in different ways. So I'm sorry I didn't fully answer that question, but we're doing the best we can.
That's okay. It's one of those things that we always need to consider, don't we? And it actually links to another question from Cormac Walsh, who has said how, just the comment you made about these communities being quite different and divided in certain ways, how you manage those diverse interests that might come out through those conversations to produce something that's a coherent vision for the community for the future, and moving beyond placing blame on central government, or and I guess moving towards a vision that they can own and take responsibility for and move forward with. So how have you, or are you, working towards that?
Yeah, this platform is really, it's the first webinar I've done on Zoom. It's really useful that all the notes just taken automatically down the side of the page. Yeah, thanks Cormac. So again, partly of that is like any going back to the town of Youghal, for example, like any town the size of Youghal of 9,000 people, you see that there are aspirations there are initiatives, people are trying to move and to do things. In terms of coherency, we've joined a couple of existing meetings, one called My Town, My Plan, which is run by an organization called CCAD. And the idea there was to get local people together to discuss what is the future vision for Youghal. And we kind of just latched onto that and listened in. And there were internal coherency issues there, people obviously pushing for different things. And there's a series of seminars over a number of months, and different speakers would come in and different attendees would come in as well. And they were pushing their own individual kind of agendas is a strong word, but some of them are, be them related to business. I suppose the strongest theme that is emerging from Youghal is tourism, and so we actually put the word resilience to some local stakeholders at the beginning, and they replaced the word with 5 other terms. Joe, if I remember, were green, heritage-led, regeneration, opportunity. I'm just going to say there were 4. There were opportunity, and they were, I forget the 5th one, but they were positive words, but they were based around, again, heritage-led. that is a local kind of quite a narrow ambition to, not narrow ambition, I don't mean that in a bad way, but that is a very concerted effort to drive the heritage of Youghal. Then from there, you can look at links and say, okay, well, is any of this heritage perhaps under threat from coastal flooding? And you can kind of improve the coherence there of the message and say, you can absolutely drive with heritage. Can we start talking about how that heritage might be maintained as well, and if there are any adaptation management issues there going forward based on increased intensity and severity of storm, frequency of storms, and sea level rise, etc. So interestingly, some of the output of that My Town, My Plan ended up being a little bit one-sided. We didn't put the final report together and the final presentation together. We just kind of watched the process and chipped in. They asked us to put in a climate change element, which we did. But that turned out to be, and anybody who's worked with communities and local stakeholders, there are definitely stronger leadership figures who, in certain circumstances, impose their will, and that's neither good nor bad. It does happen. So I'd say there could have been more coherency overall with that output as well. So we're not the only ones struggling with that in Youghal. But just listen, do a lot of listening. I think that's been our motto from the beginning of this project, really.
Yeah, and I suppose also like going to where people are, kind of thinking about just the previous question about kind of engaging a diverse group of people, thinking about how you might get insight from a group of people that won't attend a meeting or that won't provide an online consultation. I mean, have you found, I don't know how COVID has impacted activity over the summer, but is there anything that you guys have done to adapt to the COVID situation to kind of move that engagement forward that's worked well, or that you think you might continue doing to try and reach out to different groups of people?
Yeah, so we've been on Community Radio Youghal, talking about these issues, and Community Radio Youghal, this is where the diversity of community comes, because it's actually a very popular radio station, and we've used Facebook has been really important. So we're actually, I think the Facebook page there has 9,000 followers, and the population is about 9,000 people. So not assuming that they're all local followers, but it is it's a popular Facebook page, and so we're there. Okay, we are narrowing down to people who have access to Facebook, I guess. But one thing we've been doing as well, we've been talking to local historians. Something that we're playing with at the moment in the project is we're trying to put together a historical example of how Youghal has faced adversity in the past, and perhaps built resilience. And we're putting that together in a timeline as an example of kind of a positive example of, okay, big issues have been tackled before. This is how you did it. These are the people involved. These are the kind of questions that are asked. And project that into the future with climate change. We see very much just a lens on local issues, because, as I mentioned, with governance, local communities are constantly governing themselves, but they're also constantly adapting. And this is not to play climate change down in any way, but it is, in a sense, just another thing that they will have to adapt to in some way, probably. So yeah. There's a rant. Yeah.
No, I know. I think I agree. We actually had a question coming up about the community focus on heritage being quite interesting, and whether there was scope to use previous processes of change as a way to think about the future. So I think that's, you kind of answered that question as in that point. But I think that point about climate change being another thing that we're having to adapt to, I think that's something that's coming out more and more in conversations around adaptive capacity and resilience and adaptation, that actually, if you look at fishing communities, they're always having to adapt to something different, or and so maybe there's something we need to look at about in terms of how people have adapted to other things in the past, and how that can be harnessed to move forward around other topics.
And the added, if I can just add to it, so the added benefit of that is that it's a bit of a can-do attitude, right? So we probably all read articles about that I think there's a pretty popular one. Fear alone won't be much use in tackling this issue. So proving how things have been done in the past is also can do. How you then skirt the topic of, because there are failures in the past as well, right? So you could also be kind of talking about something that hasn't worked and that perhaps doesn't boost confidence much, but it's an important thing to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the points you made about kind of cross-policy approaches, so how you bring people along on the journey even if they might be skeptical. So focusing on the heritage, but say, okay, well, yes, heritage is really important and tourism is really important. How do we future-proof that in a way that's resilient and adaptive to climate change impacts and other impacts in the future? And we had a question in the Q&A box from Jack Daly, who's asked, when discussing climate change on coasts, adaptation tends to take precedence over mitigation. Has your work with communities indicated any interest or focus on mitigation measures? So, for example, emission reductions, either at a local or a national scale, rather than adaptation measures.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's actually something that we're not leading with. We are very much leading with adaptation. You're right in your guess there. But mitigation is something that we're finding that stakeholders and people involved in the project are leading with, and that is something that Ireland as a nation is leading with, the national policy is leading with, and so we're not looking at that specifically. We are really focused on climate change adaptation, but local initiatives to tackle, to improve climate change mitigation exist and are very much at the forefront. I think we are going to tie them in writing up this project, absolutely. But we kind of felt locally that we needed to push the other kind of side of the coin, I guess. And I think that would be a criticism of policy in Ireland to this stage as well. There is very little on adaptation. It is very mitigation driven, which is great. You know, those policies and those processes need to be in place, absolutely. But as we all know, at some point, it's also about facing the fact that things are changing. Some things we're not going to be able to arrest or to stop, and we need to kind of deal with adaptation issues. Thanks. I think it was Jack, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thanks, Cormac. Thanks for that. We got that question. That was the one we've just posed, so that's great. I don't think there are any other questions at the moment. Does anybody else want to ask Glen anything before?
I'll just chuck in it's on the presentation as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
There's my email address.
And as Glen said at the beginning of his presentation, you're really keen to get feedback and insights on how you might be able to work in the future, what other things you might want to consider. So if anybody wants to contact Glen to have any conversations about the project and about, you know, any other experience that they might have or any research they might know of that could be helpful, then please do reach out to Glen. I always like those. I always like those sorts of presentations where you can say, help me. I want to know what you're doing as well.
Exactly. And just quickly there to follow up, Jack, I hope I wasn't too dismissive there about mitigation. On reflection, I realise I might have sounded that way, but that's not. Okay, just wanted to add that.
That's okay. Just out of interest, I mean, was anything coming up in terms of individual behaviours that people felt that they could do? We're doing work through our project at the moment on the idea of climate citizenship, and that very much is around working towards climate related behavior change and kind of moving away from at least within my work, from a purely marine and ocean focus, but moving to a bigger system thinking. Were there any particular behaviors that people seemed more responsive to doing or to adopting through your work?
Again, that's, I think, moving a little bit with some existing trends. I mean, beach cleans and plastic issues, huge, you know. People wanted to lead with that topic, and it is often the case when you start to engage on climate change issues, very quickly things turn to plastic, you know, which again, not an unimportant issue at all. you've got to navigate that, your responses to that, I think, carefully. And popular, very, very popular in Ireland at the moment is the construction of greenways, so called greenways, which are kind of walking and cycling paths that, so Ireland's had a lot of railway infrastructure that I think by the late, I would say the 60s had all gone, and that is a remnant of the unfortunate colonial behaviour of partly my country, I guess, but yeah, the idea is to use this infrastructure to put in place walking and cycling routes that link up some towns, and it's extremely popular. So in terms of that links very closely to mitigation, and so reducing carbon emissions by encouraging other forms of transport and activity and sports. But some of these greenways in Youghal, for example, is going to run right along the coast. You know, so you've gone there straight from a mitigation topic to an adaptation topic of, okay, what are perhaps the upkeep and maintenance costs of this going? And that's a whole other area that we haven't delved into much in terms of private property as well. And I know there's research going on this in Galway on well, not only lots of places about property insurance in the light of climate change as well. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And insurance is a tool really to start managing adaptation.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about, you know, how you manage the risk of those mitigation infrastructures and how you then kind of protect those for the future as well. And great to hear that some of our infrastructure might be used to create connections between towns, because the railway infrastructure is rubbish.
Yeah. But what I was looking at as well, I mentioned the My Town, My Plan meetings that were going on. There are eight towns are involved in that, looking at issues in their town. I glanced over a few of them last night, a few of the outputs, and I think all of them have suggested a greenway be built. So it's definitely a la mode at the moment.
Great, that's great. Just Cormac's got one point where he says about, he'd said to you that resilience is what you do when there is no money for proper investment in coastal infrastructure, and what your views might be on that now. Yeah,
I mean, yes and no, because proper coastal infrastructure is a form of resilience as well. So I don't, yeah, I do get it, which is standing with a stern look on your face when you're knee deep in seawater, I guess, is pretty resilient. But so it's a subtle debate, I think. But certainly, and this again is where we come into it's why we've led with what are the issues locally, because investment, as you can imagine, in smaller towns, especially if they feel like they're on the fringes of County Cork, it is an issue. How do I see this now? Yeah, very much the same way there, I guess. Yeah.
one for a chat over a beer in the future, hopefully.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, when drinking beer is safe again.
when we're allowed to do that again. Okay, that's great. We've probably got a couple more minutes if anybody has any final questions or comments. There's a few people that have said thank you so much for the talk. They'll be in touch with you to talk about the research in more detail. I think it's been a really interesting presentation. The first one we've had that focuses around adaptation and resilience, so it's great to have that as part of the MarSocSci webinar series. As I said at the beginning, the presentation slides and recording will be made available in the next week or so, and we'll pop them out through the newsletter. And if anybody's missed Glen's contact details for any reason and wants to get in touch with him, you can always get in touch with me and I can put you in touch, that's no problem. But without any further ado, Glen, thank you so much for being involved. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining. It's been great to see you all in a really interesting discussion, and everybody stay safe and well over the next few weeks. So that's great. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks, Glen. Bye.
Bye.